This is Fred McCoy, and Shelia McCoy is going to join me here in a second.
Yeah.
This is going to be our last video on the Hubert Bay subject. Hubert Bay McCoy and Rio Hatfield and Daryl Fetty and so forth. Don't want it to seem like we're beating a dead horse, but like I said in the beginning on the first video we did, it's a very important part of our life, the Hubert Bay McCoy story. We spent a lot of time researching it, writing 2 books on it.
Yeah.
And it really, it's really
Very enlightening.
And what's so intriguing about it is the fact that you had Rio Hatfield and Ron McCoy. Of course, those are the 2 guys that said that they signed a peace treaty. I forget what year it was. It was after 9/11. They said they wanted the Hatfields and McCoys to come together after 9/11. Well, the Hatfields and McCoys have been together for years. Some Hatfields and McCoys never separated, even during the feud. So there was a peace treaty, bury the hatchet ceremony and everything, like we said, in 1976 between Jim McCoy and Willis Hatfield, the only living son of Devil Anse. Jim McCoy was the oldest living McCoy at the time. So all that had taken place. So what Rio and Ron did was nothing more than a publicity stunt, which is fine. Everybody wants their 15 minutes of fame, and they got theirs by saying they was responsible for bringing peace to the Hatfields and McCoys. Well, anybody believes that? I got some beachfront property in Arizona to sell them, but either way, Ron McCoy was one of the ones responsible for filing the famous lawsuit. McCoy's suing the Hatfields. It was McCoy's suing the Vances.
Yeah.
Didn't have nothing to do with the Hatfields. And Rio, of course, in the book I'll get here in a minute, Rio puts in his statement that he never thought he'd be friends with McCoys or trust a McCoy again. And that's what's so hurtful about this story, is the fact that had a McCoy said this about a Hatfield,
Exactly.
the West Virginia Hatfields would have been fit to be tied.
They would have been very upset.
And this is defamation, it's slanders, and this family, Hubert Bay's families had to live with that, and it's very, very unprofessional and very, I don't care how good looking you are or think you are, how much money you've got, what a good speaker you are, and how good you may represent the Pike County tourism. It don't make it right. In fact, it belittles yourself. I think it takes away from your character, your reputation, and so forth, to realize that I don't know if they thought this would never come out, that nobody would ever find out about it, or what. I'm going to try to read some of this. She's going to take a close-up picture of this, and she'll put it at the back of the video where you can pause, freeze frame it, and read it for yourself. But just try to listen to this for a minute, and it's only about 3 or 4 minutes long, and I'm going to try to read it so I don't confuse it or mess it up. But on September the 9th of 2015, in the radio interview with Phoebe Judge, she says, "Rio, tell us about your grandfather and how he became the last Hatfield to kill a McCoy." If you haven't listened to that, the first thing to do is Google Phoebe Judge, Hatfield McCoy saga. And when it comes up, go to 6 minutes and 35 seconds, I think it is. You can move the little hand, 6 minutes and 35 seconds, and that will be where she starts interviewing Rio Hatfield about his grandfather, Allen Hatfield. And tell us about your grandfather and how he killed the last McCoy. Rio Hatfield said, "That's interesting. That was in the Washington Post on May the 20th last year." Rio also says to her that the story is very well documented in the book. He's referencing the book that was just written. That's what they're on there doing. One of the things is advertising Ron McCoy's book, and it's called Reunion. Rio says that story is well documented in that book. Okay, first let's look at the Washington Post article that Rio references on May the 20th, 2014. Oh no, we can't. We can't look at it because it doesn't exist, or we couldn't find it if it does. And I'll tell you what happened there. It was May the 20th, but it was 2013. It wasn't the Washington Post, it was the Huntington Herald Dispatch, which Sheila should have a copy of that at the end of the video also. Sheila and I did, however, find the story in the Washington Post dated October the 17th of 2013. It was written by Dave Samara, and another article is online, Granta Magazine, dated September the 3rd, 2011, authored by Dean King. Now, Dean King is the author of the book, Hatfield's and McCoy's The Feud. So Dean King is well known, a well recognized and honored author. Both stories were almost verbatim. We mean word for word, as Rio had described the story to Phoebe Judge of how a McCoy, while in a brothel, had shot his grandfather in the back 3 times, and his grandfather turned around and killed him, and he happened to be a McCoy. If you listen to that tape, and Rio Hatfield telling Phoebe Judge about it, it's almost verbatim what the Washington Post had wrote in it, what Granta Magazine had wrote in it, and what the Huntington Herald Dispatch had, almost verbatim. Now, let's look at the well-documented book that Rio alludes to, titled Reunion by Ron McCoy. First, let's look at page 3 of the book itself, where he himself, Ron McCoy, writes, when referencing the family history that was, in his words, I was profoundly ignorant. That's what Ron McCoy says. He says on page 4 here that he was 35 years old before I even knew that I was related to the famous McCoy clan. And then down here on page 14, Ron says, on page 14, he's got a new chapter started, and the title of it is History. History of the Hatfield and McCoy feud and the families. He was 35 years old before he even knew he was related to anybody. But yet he's going to tell you the history in this book of the Hatfield-McCoy feud. And that is what has happened throughout the years. And like I said, may not be the prettiest, the best spoken, the richest, the best demeanor. I may get real passionate about things that I talk about and loud. But we investigate and we try to tell the truth on all this stuff. But when you have people out here that says they're 35 years old before they ever knew they was even related, and then they write a book and they're going to tell you the history of the Hatfield-McCoy feud, that means that they're getting their history lesson, they're getting their material from somebody else's book. They're going to copy a book from years past, or a couple of years, or last week. But they're going to copy it off somebody else because what do they know? How are they going to learn it? Now, if they pick the wrong book, if they pick Tom Dodson, if they pick Altina Waller, if they pick any of these other authors that we've got listed in our book in here, that's when you open the book up and right off the bat it says Captain Devil Anse Hatfield, or Randall was a Union soldier and Devil Anse was a Confederate, and that's clues that you know right off the bat that that person doesn't know what they're talking about, because Devil Anse was not a captain in the Confederate Army, and so forth like that. But anyway, on page 14, he's going to tell the history in his book on the Hatfields and McCoys. Anyway, back to Rio's statement. In his interview with Phoebe Judge, he says the story about his grandfather is well documented in that book. So let's see what the book says. On page 168, in that well-documented book, it says, Rio was the grandson of famed Mate 1 Police Chief Alan Hatfield.
Right.
Chief Hatfield had been involved in an infamous occurrence in 1947, decades after the last gunshot of the feud was fired. When Chief Hatfield and another officer raided a Brody house, an angry patron grabbed the officer and shot Hatfield twice in the back. My grandfather turned and shot him dead, says Rio. The man who fired the shot was named McCoy. Footnote 93. Now there's a footnote there in Ron McCoy's book that's going to tell us his source of information. It's going to tell us cites the source of the story. And we're going to go to the back of his book, to Roman numeral 7 of this well-documented book, and the footnote or endnote says, Granta.com, War and Peace on the Big Sandy, by Dean King, Granta Magazine, 3 September 2011. Wait a minute. That was the first time that story has ever appeared that we could find. And Sheila and I have went through hundreds of thousands of newspapers. We've got hundreds of copies of them, but we've gone through thousands. And that's the first time that we found the story in print was 2011, September the 3rd, 2011. And it was on an online magazine called Granta Magazine. Let's see who Dean King interviewed for this story. Oh, wow. It was Rio Hatfield himself. Laugh out loud. But Hubert Bay McCoy's family's not laughing, nor Sheila and I are laughing. It's not a laughing matter. This was a man's reputation and a family's life. It was only a little while until Darrell Fetty gave a similar story to the Huntington Herald Leader on May the 20th, 2012. May of the following year is when Darrell Fetty gave his story to the newspaper in Huntington. The story went from Alan Hatfield went to the grave with 3 bullets still in him, to us asking to have the body exhumed. In our first book, we asked, let's exhume the body and see if there's 3 bullets in there. I don't think there's 3 bullets there. We don't. From Hubert Bay McCoy or from anybody else. I don't think he was ever shot. But that would have proved it. Like I said the other day, I've got 3 pins in my back. And when I die, those 3 pins, my body will rot away, but those 3 metal pins will still be there. And so would them bullets. Well, when we mentioned about exhuming Alan Hatfield and seeing if the bullets was there, then you can listen to Rio Hatfield tell Phoebe Judge later in life, but they somehow got lost. Rio tells Phoebe Judge that later on in life, the bullets started causing his grandfather problems and they had the bullets removed. And Phoebe Judge says, did you save the bullets? Do you still have them? What an artifact to have. And Rio says, no, we've lost them. They're gone. Along with the ring. And like I said, we did that story the other day, sleight of hand or distraction, trying to get you off on something. He wanted to talk about anything. He wanted to talk about the diggers digging for 150-year-old bullets. He wanted to talk about anything he could except those 3 supposed bullets that was taken from his grandfather. See how the stories that Rio gives, trying to pretend the story came from the Washington Post or a well-documented book? You know, when Phoebe Judge asked him tell us about the story about your grandfather and him being the last, him killing the last McCoy. And Rio said, that's interesting you asked that. That was in the Washington Post, May the 20th. And that's also in a well-documented book. the stories that are in that well-documented book and in that newspaper article is the story that Rio Hatfield gave to Dean King on September the 3rd of 2011. But he's trying to redirect. He wants a person to think that that story came from a reputable book or a reputable newspaper, but it actually came from him. That's the hard thing to believe. When it came from, it seems to have originated from Rio Hatfield himself. Ron was like so many other so-called Hatfield-McCoy authors and historians. He just wrote what he was told in order to have enough pages to say he'd written a book and stay in the limelight of attention. It didn't matter to Ron and Rio if they were signing peace treaties or suing Jim Vance and calling them Hatfields or slandering a family's or loved one's name with untrue stories, as long as they was in the newspaper. And you know, Devil Anse was a narcissist. That's why he talked to the newspaper so much. That's why he was always doing the things that he done. And it must be sad to be like this. It seems like every story that we try to straighten out and get the facts to, get documents to, there'll be 5 more that pops up on the internet before you can clear this one up. And all it is people wanting to be in the limelight, people wanting to be known. And these are two of the... Rio Hatfield grew up in Huntington, West Virginia. Ron McCoy grew up all over the place. I think his father was in the military and he traveled a lot. And he had never been back there until he come back there and filed the lawsuit against John Vance wanting his property. But these are two of the spokespeople for the Pike County tourism. All the Hatfields and McCoys in Pike County that born and raised there, but they want people that's going to tell their story or promote their bus ride along these places where they can say whatever they want, whether it's the truth or not. These people that's on these buses have no idea whether they're hearing the truth or not. They just make it interesting, and that's what has happened. And it's
sad.
It's sad. You go ahead. I'm gonna grab a book. I'll be right back.
Rio, that was sad. Virginia is the daughter of Hubert Bay, like we said earlier, and she's had to grow up listening to these stories about her dad supposedly killed, in her Brody house when he wasn't. But if you listen to one of the recordings that we have of Alan Hatfield, he tells you who was in the Brody house.
Here's our last book that we wrote on this subject, and the last McCoy murdered in the Hatfield-McCoy feud, and the story of Hubert Bay McCoy. And this is mine and Sheila's research. It's got the photos in it. It's got the everything that Rio Hatfield and Darrell Fetty has said. And like I said, this has been a very interesting and enlightening story to us. Out of all the stories, we've got a 900-page book called Monument for a Murderer. And you can imagine the monument we're talking about, which is the big statue of Devil Anse Hatfield. He was a murderer. And they put a monument up there of him, and you may as well have a monument of Charles Manson or Jeffrey Dahmer or whoever, any mass murderer, because that's what you've got. But they put he put a monument up of himself, and after that, people automatically just assume this must be a hero. Look what a monument he's got, and that's not so. That's going to conclude this video. Over the years, as we go through the museum and pick out different boards that we have fixed where people can do their own research, and we show you. We don't just tell you that this person was shot or that person was shot. We'll show you either newspaper, back it up. And so thank you for watching. Sheila's going to put all these boards at the back of the video. This video is going to be 3 or 4 parts long because sometimes people don't have time to watch a long video, and this way they can divide it up. So
we're trying to make it as short as possible, but get enough information in there for you.
And when I get talking, you can already see what I do. I can bleed off on so many different things, but there's so much to the Hatfield and McCoy feud. And there's so many tall tales, there's so many, and it's the Hatfield and McCoy feud and history is so intriguing and interesting on its own.
Without adding to it.
You don't have to add to it. You don't have to try to make it interesting. It's interesting. It's got murder, it's got
romance,
it's got bacon. It's got everything. The pig, a moonshine, it's got everything in it. And thank you all. See you on the next video.
Hope you enjoyed it.
Please subscribe and like or whatever all them things you have to do to the videos.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.